Peace, everybody. What's going on, man? We out here at one of the battle forts, one of the old battle forts built on top of one of the mounds out here in Al Andalusia, which we also know as Florida Republic. And this was one of the ramparts that was left from some of the old conflicts between the Moors and the so-called Spanish, going all the way back to maybe the 1500s. What we gotta understand is that at one point in some of the Spanish maps, especially the earlier ones that were basically Reconquista maps, meaning that they were, that once the Moors agreed to have certain aspects of their community merged with the new Spanish regime, they allowed their names to be redesignated, repositioned, which then the Spanish would then come into places where the Moors was already at, and then bring these writs and these edicts, and then those Moors that wasn't down with it would rebel, and then those Moors that wanted to stay would follow the edict, and then pretty soon they're now absorbed, and it goes from Rodrigo, Ra'amak Bey to Rodrigo, whatever, Rodrigo Santana or whatever they want to do. And so what that did was once they took control of the ruling government of the specific place, the nation state or the city state, then what they would do is that they would enslave the Muslims first. Now notice I said that they would come in and shut down the Moorish or absorb the Moorish territory or community, and then once that would happen, the first thing they would do is enslave the Muslims and make them force them into Christianity through forced baptism and stuff. So that again was a rite of passage by which Moors would put themselves in positions to be somewhat redesignated into something that they really not. And so this, where we stand here, is like evidence of that. You could tell in the strata of the different types of rocks that's used that this was, a remnant of what was left. You could tell as we go down the stairs, it's the same type of thing. But like I was saying, a lot of the stuff they was doing back then, all of the United States or some of these maps was referred to as Florida. You could check that out. But since we're talking about a civil war and all of this other stuff that they trying to pump on the so-called American people, we should do the knowledge. You should do the knowledge that they when they was talking to us about the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, they only mentioned people like Crispus Attucks and these people, and they only talking about the aspect of the war that took place in what they now today call Virginia, but back then was called like Edom and stuff like that. So when we really talk about the true American Revolution and where it started, it actually started in 1511, particularly funny enough, in Baton Rouge, under Mohammed bin Said, who led the revolt of the Fulbe Moors, who were not trying to hear the redistribution or the reacquisition of Moorish imperial territory put under Spanish rule. And because the Spanish at the time was working with the dirty French, these so-called Europeans, again, that when we say Europeans, we gotta understand we're not talking about Caucasian people that phenotypically call themselves Europeans today. We're talking about the so-called mulatto or amalgamated Moors, or what they call Tawny Moors, or Mozarabs, or Mamelukes, or Janissaries, or any of these things that they were calling them to create a position where they could maintain a unified position over the traditional Moors. So based on that, the slave revolt that started in 1511 spread from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and it went all the way up into as far as Alaska, and it went all the way down as far as Chile. Word. And it created such a universal swell of Aboriginal, indigenous, or autochthonous Moorish people who were fighting against the encroachment of the so-called European. The so-called European, it created a vacuum, and so this led to the consolidation of what we call the Continental Congress, or what the great Prince Uriel Bey referred to as the Consultus Huevos Regnum, which came out of the Capitis societies and the Capitis Confederate, which is basically the Article of Federations and the Article of Association, where the original 13 families of the original Moorish dynasties that were connected to the Margarita de Iasosa line of Moors that escaped through what they now call the Portugal dominions, and they were able to maintain their position and power, and then basically merged all of the so-called European families together in 962 as the Holy Roman Empire. So between 962 and 1511, you have the expansion of the so-called Moorish diaspora, Moorish Empire towards the Far East and the West, but over here, our empire started to wane. So by 1511, the Moors had enough, and they set up situations where they started fighting against that. People like Denmark Vesey, people like Prince, what was his name? Princess Yusuf Solomon, Job Solomon, all of these were Moors. Same thing, Frederick Douglass Pops was a Moor from the Fulbe dynasty. His name was Muhammad something. So you ask yourself, where was all of that in the narration of a slave and all that stuff that he wrote? But see, we gotta understand is that the European version for the European name for a free national that had their own land but was not trying to capitulate to the laws of Europe, which was becoming vogue for certain so-called autochthonous Moors to have their own thing. These Moors was like, nah, we don't want to be down with that European shit. So based on that, they created a position by which now, if you wasn't adopting European law, you were now put in a position where you had to be taken out. And so a lot of Moors rebelled against that, and that basically was the foment of the revolution. This is why between 1511 now and 1511, which is when the revolutionary aspect of America starts, we go all the way up to 1775 now, is when it foments itself into a position where by now people have to realize that there's no other way to conserve or preserve the so-called union. So that union winds up becoming fractured, and in that fracturing of that, the only tie that's binding them together is the fact that they were at one time related. So what do? So they create a cestuary trust basically to consolidate their family interests, and then reconsolidate the fact that they now want to be independent of all of the internal and outside wars. So in that, they create a compact with the 12 to 13 families, each representing the zodiac, and then they come together and then form this consultus verbos regnum, which is this imperial trust that's allegedly left for the original Moors. So the compact to lead that to happen started in 1776, but it didn't become fulfilled until 1787, when the so-called Treaty of Peace and Friendship was signed by the Sultan of then Morocco, meaning Morocco here, the Maghreb al-Aqsa, Morocco the farthest west, at this time at Marrakesh. Marrakesh at this time is Philadelphia, and Philadelphia, Sheikh of Mexico. From Philadelphia, that Sultan met the representatives of the Almaracanos, because that's what it say on the original treaty, the Almaracanos, and they worked it out through their administrative Mamelukes, people like Thomas Barclay and Thomas Barclay and Thomas Jefferson. And then these dudes basically inherit the new so-called country. That's why when we read the letter that Washington wrote to the Sultan, he said that the prior government sought fit to change their government. So the government that we wind up doing, or we wind up having, had to reconsolidate itself into a manner by which it could eventually survive. So what it had to do was go into a series of interregnum, which is a way that people would describe a government going into recess. So that interregnum went from 1791 up until really 1928 till the Prophet came, and then once Noble Jew Ali did what he did, they had to put all of that to sleep.
Wow.
So here we are now in the birthplace again. We find ourselves where? In Baton Rouge, right? Louisiana, And now they done popped this dude Sterling. And we got to remember that the pound sterling is the name of the British reserve currency that no longer is functioning, which is why Britain had to break away from the European Union, which now isolates Britain as a non-EU country in Europe, which now creates another vacuum. So they just came out with a movie a while ago called London is Falling. And it's all basically about how this revolution now that's been sparked is basically going to put Europe in the place that America was in prior to the change up. And now here in America, what we think the international forces is here to invade, a lot of them is going to come here to hold down the original constituency, the true, as the prophet said, the true American citizens. To be an American, you can only be that by two ways, through birth or naturalization. To be a citizen of the United States, the naturalization process into that is the birth certificate. But remember, they established the birth certificate illegally by denationalizing Moors from their original nations and national names. So in that, part two, we'll build on more of the coming revolution and show the parallels between the fact that, again, the original Revolutionary War that started amongst the Fulbe Moors in New Orleans, Baton Rouge specifically, now almost 239 years later, the first now shot is fought in this new American Revolution now, where they done popped this brother Sterling in Baton Rouge, in the so-called Moorish community, that may be about 20 miles from where the original joint actually started in Baton Rouge. The original American Revolution, again, started in Baton Rouge. But if you believe that the American Revolution started with Caucasian people, that means that you're coming from the history of somebody brought up in the United States. If you understand the true history of America now you're getting into yourself as an American citizen of Al-Moroccan or Moorish or Moroccan origin.
Big
So